Caryl Levine and Ken Lee. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Bora. Nice to be here.
Our pleasure.
Caryl and Ken, I'd love to hear about the moment almost 30 years ago in China when you and Ken discovered black rice. What was that about? What about that experience made you think this could be something special?
Well, first of all, when you're in China, you usually sit down to bowls of white rice. So when we were in a Dai minority village in southwestern China, it's a Sichuan where there's all these different ethnic villages. We were in a Dai minority village and we sat down to a bowl of steaming black rice. So first of all, it was incredibly exotic. It had the look of a midnight sky. And then when we tasted it, it had this roasted nutty flavor with almost a hint of fruit at it. And we fell in love. I mean, here we were a young, couple in love, taking an adventure, looking for the next opportunity and hoping that it had to do with something in China from our travels. And here we found this black exotic rice. And the next morning we went to the market and we said to the vendors, tell us about Hami. Hami means black rice. And they told us a folk tale that we heard throughout the rest of the 2-month market research trip through China, that this was a rice that they called tribute rice or longevity rice. Because of its nutritional value, it was reserved exclusively for the emperors to ensure their long life and good health. So we're walking around the Forbidden City and Ken said, we'll call this forbidden rice, the emperor's exclusive grain. And that's what started Lotus Foods.
Ken, are you the marketing brains behind this operation? Because immediately with the naming and the tagline, you strike me as one.
It's interesting. Maybe I'll be remembered, if remembered at all, as a one-hit wonder, because I don't know that I've contributed anything else to the company in terms of its marketing efforts. But that, and maybe it'll be engraved on my tombstone if I'm buried. He was the one who named it Forbidden Rice. But it's an interesting thing because, it was something as we traveled through China. This was a 2-month-long market research trip. So Caryl jumped in with the Dai Minority Village, but the idea was that we were going to look for a business opportunity in China. Me being American-born Chinese, my parents still had some contacts in China. She met a woman at church who was from China studying international business, and she thought anything Western was really hot in China at the time. So we fancied ourselves as those business people that could help her leverage her business opportunities. And off we went on this market research trip looking for a business idea. We weren't actually looking for a food business idea. We were just really open book that by traveling, we'd run into some opportunity. And at the conclusion of that trip, we came home and we put on a big white piece of paper what amounted to be 90 ideas on what we could possibly do for a business. And having just moved from Connecticut to the Bay Area, living in one of our country's food meccas, the San Francisco Bay Area, we thought this black rice idea really had some legs to it and would allow us an opportunity to kind of get a foot in the door. Because let's face it, every category on the shelf on a store is a mature marketplace, and there weren't many areas for white space to make a splash. But black rice from China and red rice from Bhutan, these were what we call pigmented varieties of rice, seemed like a viable opening for entrepreneurial activity.
Wow, 2 months research trip. So this is so interesting. I ask founders about these early days, and I'm especially curious about what the research phase was like. And I've heard multiple interesting types of research phases. One of them was I remember like a research summer, or some people just do very quickly. But in your case, you're specifically looking for a business opportunity and you decided to go to China for 2 months. So I want to backtrack a little bit more. What was it before? What were you doing? And you came up with 90 different ideas and didn't even think it was going to be a food business. And when I heard maybe bringing a Western idea to China might have been a little bit of a motivation, but turns out the opposite happened. So what were you doing before? Were you thinking that, okay, let's go to China and start a business in whatever it can be? Let's see if the genius strikes us.
So I was actually at the University of Hartford in development fundraising.
I went to University of Hartford. I have an MBA from University of Hartford. What are the chances?
That's great. And I actually took a new position at UC Berkeley that and within this position, because in between leaving the University of Hartford and taking the position at UC Berkeley, Ken and I were kind of reevaluating what we were going to do and figured this was a great opportunity to launch into something entrepreneurial. But when I got the job at UC Berkeley, it was just such a great opportunity that I negotiated actually a 2-month leave of absence after I arrived there and set up my office and met the board, because I shared with them that we were already conceived this idea. And so they allowed this, which was pretty phenomenal. And that's why we were able to embark on this journey and then, you know, discover the rice and discover what was going to be our entrepreneurial calling for the next 30 years. But I actually stayed at the university for the first 7.5 years of that.
Oh, wow. So you were
So yeah, we needed that 7.5 years because Caryl was actually bringing home income while we started this business, because it started very small and it's baby steps all for many years. And so, you know, to answer your first question, I was in the financial services arena working, selling insurance and investments. And that actually was coming to an end. Learned a lot of important lessons, but it wasn't working out very well. Lots of competition in Hartford, Connecticut. And that's
insurance capital of the world.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the backdrop for me. Certainly our background didn't qualify us as entrepreneurs to get into the CPG food space, but that's where we were at the time. And here we are.
So 2 important lessons here. You don't need to have a background in something like this, which should be encouraging to potential entrepreneurs. But also the 7.5 year is not nothing, right? So a lot of people kind of glorify bootstrapping as opposed to taking on VC investment these days without realizing where's the money going to come from while you're bootstrapping, right? So one of you had to continue for a long time. And, you know, I think you had to kind of use credit cards with 0-point financing in the early days, right? You know, how did that
we
kind
were
of work
very
out?
lucky because that was what you could do then. I don't think you could do that now.
Right.
But certainly then it was really a perfect way to finance your business.
I think I managed about 20 credit cards that would allow us to borrow at 0% interest for a period of time, 90 days, sometimes 6 months. And I would just manage them to roll it over into another card once that time expired. And so it allowed us to have some flow of capital to kind of build our business from the ground up.
Along with some friends and family that we were really proud of, that we always returned their investment.
Yeah, we promised each other that these were friends and we weren't going to jeopardize our friendships by not paying them back their money. And so we're happy to say that we were able to do that. And I think the other thing about those 7.5 years is just the resilience and the determination to kind of do what we needed to do to make this thing work and to survive, because most businesses fail so early on. Yeah, it was interesting because I think there's an adage about, you know, you need money, you know, cash is king, all this stuff. But at the same time, I think if you get too much cash all at once and you don't rely on your inner workings and your own determination to make it work, that you might like make the fatal mistake of like relying on consultants, so-called experts, to guide you along the way. And you may have missed an opportunity to learn a valuable lesson. So we had advice from someone who was an economist of sorts and got into the food business himself. And he told us, guys, you should go slow, because when you go too fast, you can make serious mistakes that could put you under. And when you make small mistakes, you can learn by them and
recover
and move on. And so, I don't know, it just seems today, or recently, people give such crazy, what is it called? Valuations.
Not anymore.
And bring so much money into, not anymore, but recently it would happen, and people would take that money, not realizing that they would soon be trying to make decisions on a short-term quarterly basis instead of looking at the long-term viability of their own company.
Mm-hmm. So let's tell the story. We looked at black rice. We think now this is a great business to build. What's the next thing to do? Finding farms, manufacturers, importers? What are we doing?
So basically, it all started, the customer base actually was HighEnd Chefs. So as Ken said, we were living in the Bay Area. San Francisco and the Bay Area had a plethora of really excellent chefs. And when we were in China, we sent home a couple of kilos of the rice, and we made little small bags of samples, and we sent it to a dozen of San Francisco's.
We sent a letter. And we asked them if they'd like to see a sample.
Right.
And it was interesting because while Caryl was working a real job, producing income, I was moonlighting as a bartender. And I actually took the sommelier for this restaurant to lunch to ask about our plan to launch into high-end white tablecloth restaurants. And he looked at me, and this is the lesson. He looked at me and said, Ken, you're a nobody. These chefs are not going to have time to see you to talk about rice. And so the lesson is, when you try to do something different, 1,000 people will tell you you can't do this. And that's not necessarily true, and we're proof of that. Mm-hmm. Because we sent the letter.
And then every single one of these chefs wanted to meet us and to get a sample of this rice. From Thomas Keller to Alice Waters to Roland Passot, Gary Danko. It was the creme of the top chefs. And everybody, in fact, Mark Miller invited us to go to that year's
Napa Valley Wine Auction.
The wine auction where he served our forbidden rice.
I had to call some of the chefs who asked for a sample, and I said, "Hey, have you used that sample yet?" And they would say, "Oh no, I've been so busy." I said, "Oh, that's okay, but could I take it back?" Because I wanted to give Chef Miller a few cups of rice so he could prepare it for this event. So. There's lots of great stories.
So again, it's really the chefs that put us on their menu, because also, so chefs don't have the time to travel the world looking for exotic ingredients. So here we were, we might not have been, we were nobodies, but we were bringing them something very exotic and very delicious. And, this black rice on a white plate, it almost became the center of the plate, as opposed to the protein that usually is the center of the plate. And the chefs just loved it. And the other lesson, of course, we learned, and we knew this, as well, but, the chefs also said, guys, if this could look delicious, this could look beautiful, but if it doesn't taste delicious, you're only going to make one sale. So taste was always number one, that it had to taste great. Mm-hmm. And then for us, also having high nutritional value, because most rices are white rice. So all the nutrient value of the rice is taken off in the bran layer. The black rice and the red Bhutanese red rice, which was our second pigmented rice, still had the bran layer on it. And that's the layer that has all the fiber and nutrients.
The anthocyanins and proanthocyanins.
That are so good for you.
Like when people talk about the nutritional value of blueberries, it's in the pigments, the dark, skin of the blueberry. So it's, like that with all kinds of things. Apples or potatoes have different skin color, as do people. And it's that bran layer where all the goodies reside. But going back to those chefs, it was a laundry list of who's who kind of culinary type of artists. And while they were all interested, someone like Alice Waters, she's all about local, seasonal, fresh. And so she wasn't about to put a Chinese black rice on her menu. but she was curious. And then someone like Roland Passot, I don't know if he's still a restaurateur in San Francisco.
La Folie.
At La Folie, and he could taste it, and it wasn't like some French chefs are saying, we can't use this because it's an Asian ingredient. But he could taste it and say, this will go well with like a duck or a wild mushrooms or some type of a rice pilaf. And so
Well, France has that red Camargue rice,
right.
so he recognized right away.
So with the right palate, people can figure out what to do. And it's interesting because I think we kind of saw this opportunity as being kind of like a modern day Marco Polo, or going somewhere and bringing these treasures back. Because let's face it, chefs were busy. They didn't have time to go exploring, looking for new ingredients to put on their menu. And that's I think the thing that really worked for us was when those chefs put our rice on their menus, it kind of validated what we were doing, that this is worthy, of being on their menu. And
it's worthy for us to create a business around as well.
I'm so curious about how you proved that sommelier is so wrong, that he said that these chefs were not going to have any time for you. And he couldn't have been more wrong. All these famous celebrity chefs responded to you positively. So now the cold outreach salesperson in me wants to know what you wrote in that letter. What was the title and what were the first two sentences that got them to be interested? Because you didn't have a sample. You just said some stuff and they came back and said, I want that.
Yeah, I think
what was the stuff that you said?
I think we mentioned the pigmented rice, meaning the color brand rice, like a red rice or a black rice. And of course, rice is typically a white rice, and it's not very interesting unless you can doctor it up with some color.
Innovation. So innovation is really the key. When you could offer somebody something different that they haven't seen before, then that's going to open up doors for you.
Yeah, I think we see lots of examples of it. These are old products that are brought new into our world. Whether you go back and think about quinoa, or you think about buckwheat is making...
Or heirloom. All heirloom turkeys, heirloom, anything that is really landrace, something that hasn't been changed or altered, is really culinarily so much better for you and better for this soil. And so our DNA for our company was set very early that, number one, we realized that we actually had to keep the biodiversity of rice alive while partnering with smallholder farmers who were growing rice more sustainably and giving them, we were actually the access, we were the connectors to a commercial market for them, and also at a fair trade price. So these were very, very important tenets of how we were going to conduct our business from the very get-go. And we feel so lucky that 30 years later, we were able to stay true to these to this day. And now hopefully setting the company up to take these foundational work and go, grow it stronger in the next 30 years.
And I'll just add that I think I'll put out the word curiosity, because we were curious, to explore how do we find a business that we could work on together. But then that curiosity seemed to always be open for us. And so if you trace the arc of our evolution for Lotus Foods, we went from biodiversity of rice to moving farmers from conventionally grown to organically grown. And then I think it was 2006 maybe, we got a call from someone at Cornell University. They had been advocating this new way of growing rice that didn't use so much water and didn't have to have chemical fertilization.
Less seeds.
And use less seed, less is more paradigm. And it also mitigated methane emissions because flooded rice fields is the number 3 man-made reason for methane emissions on the planet, right behind cows, and fossil fuel extraction is number 1. And so, rice is such an important crop on the planet. More people are involved in their own livelihood with rice than anything else that human beings do. More than half the world's population gets more than half of its caloric intake from the consumption of rice. And yet a lot of our freshwater reserves is used to grow rice in flooded fields. And the flooded fields actually cause the microbial activity that creates methane, which is a noxious greenhouse gas, which is plaguing the world right now in terms of the kind of turbulent kind of weather that we're having.
So what Ken is referring to is an agroecological methodology for growing rice, which was called the system of rice intensification, which we were introduced to, as Ken said, back in 2006. And actually that became a commitment of ours, that we were going to try to really only work with farmers who were using this methodology, because we found out after visiting these farmers in Madagascar and Cambodia and Indonesia that just by changing how rice is grown, we can have economic, social, and environmental impacts. And we thought, whoa, that doesn't get better than that you can have such incredible impact just by changing different ways of growing rice.
Mm-hmm. So you initially focused on high-end chefs. I'd love to understand the inflection point, Caryl, that made you feel comfortable 7.5 years later that, okay, I can quit my university and focus on this full time. What happened? What was the growth trajectory there? Was that still chefs only, or did you use chefs as a stepping stone to go into the consumers?
Yeah, the chefs were a stepping stone. From there, we went into a retail market. Well, let me backtrack for a second. When you talk about the chefs as a stepping stone, it's also distribution. So here you might be selling to a dozen premium chefs, and you ask the chefs, who is your distributor? Where do you get most of your dry goods from? And they would say, a distributor in the area. And then we would call upon this distributor and say, you see this list of chefs and restaurants? This is who we are selling to ourselves. Why don't you take this on? And you can not only sell this to the existing chefs, but they had a list of, we might be in 6 of those, they had a list of 200 or more. And they would take us on, and that allowed the growth of the rice to so many other chefs and restaurants. So that started generating enough income for us to start thinking about the retail market. So of course, we deployed the same strategy. We would ourselves go to the retailers, sell the product in. In fact, Ken would actually, once they accepted the product, would actually go and take the what do they call it? The gun?
The
pricing gun, and price the products, and put it on the shelves.
I would manage the shelf for them, and then once I got everything looking good, put shelf talkers, things that could explain to customers what this was about. I'd go and get the demo table and the rice cookers, and I'd actually cook 3 kinds of rice, and it'd be like a wine tasting. We'd start with the white one, then go to the red one, then go to the black one. And then I'd give recipes like what you could do with various kinds of salads.
Because we had to educate the consumer about these rices, because people knew about brown rice. Mm-hmm. And during that time in the 90s, brown rice was either something that was used for a macrobiotic diet, or it was consumed by hippies like me, and it was not. Now brown rice is understood to be so healthy, but black rice and red rice, they never saw anything like that. So we had to do a lot of education, not only the consumers but also the retailers and the distributors. But just like with the chefs, when we got into a number of natural food stores, we would ask the stores, who is your distributor? And at that time, there were a lot more distributors aside from the now UNFI and KeHE. And so we would start with small distributors and gain, so many more grocery stores. And then, of course, Whole Foods at that time, was very decentralized. You would have to sell your product into absolutely every region. But then, later on, we became a global Whole Food supplier where it was brought into every store. And so it was just a steady and consistent growth of both retail and food service.
Yeah, I think going back to the chefs as a springboard, it really did act that way, because we would get into these chef restaurants, and that would provide, there was, articles written in local food sections or in the New York Times. I think we were in there several times. And so people started hearing more. There was more energy around it, and it allowed us to kind of enter into retail space. And so, yeah, it was all kind of a step-by-step type of educational process, and ended up, taking that method of like going to chefs and learning who the best distributors were, and then expanding out into the distribution network. And I think a key thing, it sounds like a small thing, but is pricing it right. So you price it at the chef or the store, so that when you do give way to a distributor, you need to build in the margin to allow the distributor to make money. Because if they're 25, 30% more than what you were selling it, it's not going to work for the store or the restaurant, because they want to pay at least the same amount. So we were able to replicate that, across the country, where that food service model, we get introduced to a chef and a distributor in like New York City, and we do the whole process all over again, reach out to a select few chefs, and then build it out like that. And that's how we kind of started in food service, and that paved the way for retail. And yeah, it's interesting to go back in time and think about that.
To think about that is a good flashback. I really love it. That distributor-driven growth model. I can feel that it was built like a machine, and it's like nodes, and each node introduced more nodes, and it was kind of like almost like a network effects in action, which I love thinking about that. So you mentioned education. Also, we talked about pricing. So I'm curious about your approach to educating the consumers. How do you help people understand the value of paying more for sustainably grown rice, while, as you mentioned, you had to build those margins in there? And there's a cookbook you released, right, called Rice is Life. Was that a part of this consumer education process that you were thinking about?
No, absolutely. So Rice is Life came about for our 25th anniversary because it was smack in the middle of COVID. So we felt we got robbed of being external and being in more, public facing to extend our education or our story. So the cookbook became that vehicle. And what we loved about Chronicle Books is that, out of the Bay Area, is that who published it, is that they understood that, yes, it had to be a cookbook, but they wanted us to tell our story. And so it's more than a cookbook. It's really about our 25-year journey in, bringing these exotic rices from faraway places to consumers and teaching them about the impact of regenerative agriculture and how one farms has, so much impact for the farmer, for the consumer, for the health of the planet. So it was really a lovely way to put this 25-year journey into a single publication that we could use, along with eating great recipes and featuring the rices. So it was a wonderful vehicle. But before that, Ken and I did a lot of talking on panels. We would go to, there's natural products, not only shows, but there's a cooperative infra and NCG, where they would get all the retailers together once a year in a place, and we got to sit down with them and to share, what we were doing to create climate, systems of change, and why it was so important. And so it was really gratifying to be able to share what we learned through our experiences, that they knew they wanted to be a part of the solution too. The stores wanted to be a part of it, the consumers wanted to be a part of it, and we were giving them an opportunity by purchasing our rice to actually vote with their pocketbooks and for better tasting choices that were not only better for their families, but better for the planet.
What are some of the marketing channels that worked really well for you? I imagine chefs themselves are kind of like the original influencers. They are creators, they are artists in a sense. I imagine they must have been impactful. What else worked well?
Definitely. I mean, the chefs, by putting your name on the restaurant menu, was really incredible advertising, and as Ken said, a way to really show that this was something special. But the other thing was, getting stores like Whole Foods to feature you on their end caps. Yes, you have to pay for those, but also not every brand gets an end cap or special. They became real partners of ours because they really. I mean, we became one of their brands of the year retailer. That they recognize the importance of your work, and so it's really a partnership. It's a collaboration, because none of this works without it's got to be a whole living system, and so it works because the distributor, everybody has a role, from the distributor to the retailer to the brand to the farmers who grow it. It's everybody has a role to play, and when everybody plays with performs their role, thinking about all the stakeholders, it does work. Whereas when it's extractive and it's only one benefit to and on the backs of somebody else, it doesn't work.
I have a personal question for you too. Now, 30 years into your journey, do you still have the entrepreneurship fire in your heart? Or do you feel beaten down by the difficulties of the food industry? If it's the first one, if you still have the entrepreneurship fire, if you wanted to start a brand new brand from scratch, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be food, any category. What category would you pick?
I don't think I would opt for another foray into this, but I don't feel beaten down. I feel like from day one, from day one, everything was new for us. We didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into. But I think it's been a tremendous journey that I wouldn't trade for anything. But I think at the same time, we realized and recognized that we could take the company so far. And maybe about 5 or so years ago, we sought to fill our first C-suite position and hired a president and a COO. And that has proven to be a good decision because of the level of experience that they brought to Lotus Foods to kind of go along with where we were at this point in time and facing many headwinds and probably better equipped to navigate them. And so we've now stepped back from the CEO-ship, and that person has been elevated to the CEO level. But what that's done is allowed us to kind of step back and focus on special projects. We still serve on the board. And so we're really now about putting steps into place to make sure that the mission and values of the company continue for, say, another 30 years. And so we're still very much involved, but just not on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
And we also took some investment a year ago, and it's allowed us to now, we're going to announce in 2025 a Lotus Foods Foundation. So I feel for myself, coming from the world of higher education philanthropy, that now I get to be a philanthropist.
We
do, but I was talking personally from my own experience that this, for me, is really coming full circle. And I think being in the business for the last 30 plus years, we are going to be very good investors because we know what to look for. And also we get to play a role in the nonprofit world as well. So that's really exciting to me.
Well, final two-part question, but now I feel like the first part, you probably, it's not relevant to you anymore since you hired a CEO. The question was going to be top two headaches, top two problems giving you a headache right now, which I think now are the headaches of the CEO, and you don't have to worry about it. So let's answer then the top two priorities you're excited about. The 30-year anniversary coming up. You have a lot of money now that you can invest in some cool, fun, new projects. What are some of the things that's keeping you excited?
Well, it's really taking this foundation that we created for the past 30 years and now this new investment and really deploying it to grow our impact even more with more farmers using more agroecological regenerative farming methods, also investing in our team. There's a lot of infrastructure that's needed when you grow. Investing in innovation for consumers so we can continue to give them access to really nutritious and delicious foods. That's part of their solution, putting great food on the table every night for themselves and their family. So that's really exciting to me.
And I think for me, it's still related to the business. I've largely been working on the operational side of the business, and there's still much work to be done in country, in the farming communities we work in, to kind of build their infrastructure, increasing their capacity, and also slimming down costs so that we can compete in a greater way with the agribusiness offerings, which are not so regenerative or so good for the soil or the planet or for the people who grow them. There's dire circumstances happening out there now with erratic weather, and also just the sheer difficulty of being a farmer, whether it's in the U.S. or around the world. I'll share one last thing. It's not the super exciting, happy note, but there's a phrase called the feminization of agriculture, which just means that farming has become so unstable and not sustainable that men have left the farms to go to the city to find other forms of employment, leaving the women, the feminization of agriculture, leaving the women to do everything else. The farming, the home garden, the rearing of children, the taking care of the elderly, the fetching of water, the cooking of food, so many things. And this new way of growing rice has offered an opportunity to stabilize farming for so many families, to bring the men back into the fold and to kind of have a more happier life. You see co-benefits, like because farmers are improving their livelihood, like the kids can go to school, or they have enough to eat, which hasn't always been the case for smallholder farmers because they have small holdings of land. So there's a lot of work yet to be done, and so that's kind of the realm in which I find myself gravitating towards, and it's very exciting.
Caryl Levine, Ken Lee, thank you for sharing your journey with me.
Thank you so much for having us, Bora.
Thank you.